What was the situation at Belleau Wood when they got there?
Oh, the Germans have been there for a long time. So in the wood itself, you have the Germans and their Maxim machine guns. They're dug in. Everything is zeroed in. To get to them, you have to cross open wheat fields. Now, everybody talks about the wheat field at Belleau Wood, but it is multiple wheat fields. You have clumps of trees in various bits and bobs, and there are Germans in those places, and you have to get to them to get them out. It's not a pleasant thing. You go from cover, open wheat field, to the wood. Okay, sounds like an easy job, except that the Germans are now firing their machine guns at you. You cannot run across the wheat field. Why? We have this thing called a rolling barrage. This is artillery that goes out in front of you and slowly progresses in front of you. If you run, you will run into your own artillery. You cannot outrun it. So you just have to cross the wheat field with your rifle and hope to get across.
So as the Marines are there, and you read the accounts where they could see the bark ripping off the trees, they could see the heads of the wheat stalks getting nipped off, they're on their bellies, and then a 5'6", 135-pound, 40-year-old gunny fires them up.
He does what a gunny is supposed to do with his junior Marines. He takes the order from the CEO and says, engage. Except that he says, come on, you sons of bitches, you want to live forever? And he drags them out. And that's Dan Daly. He's definitely the man. If he says that to me, I'm going to follow him wherever he goes.
When the gunny says, if the gunny ain't happy, nobody's going to be
nobody happy, yeah.
So, but now there's a little bit of debate over to what he really said. So tell us what we think he said and what Daly later said he said.
Well, so Daly never actually comes out and talks about his quote, with one exception. He hints to the fact that he may have said something worse. I'm not going to repeat it. I'm sure you could fill it in with your own imagination. So the exact quote that is carved literally in stone at the museum may not be quite right, but I think it is, the G-rated version for certain places. But in the sentiment is still the same. You need to get up. You need to move. Follow me. Let's go.
And once they get into the woods, what are they facing there, and what makes the difference in their success?
That is easy to say. It's marksmanship. So when the Marines come in, let's say they go to Mare Island, or they go to Port Royal or Paris Island, they're taught one thing above all else, and that's marksmanship. And it saves the day. It actually saves a lot of lives. So once they get into the wheat and through the wheat field and into the woods, they can start taking cover and concealment. They're going to maneuver and fire. They're picking off the Germans at meters and meters, and I've had the number and I've lost it.
I heard 700 to 800
Yeah,
meters.
thank you. And it is, the Germans are floored. They've never seen this before. The French didn't do this. The British couldn't do this. And now who are these Americans that are doing this? So you got to remember, a lot of these young recruits were come fresh off the farm field. So if you put another rifle in their hand and give them the expertise to do it, they're really going to take it to them. Even the city kids, no disrespect to the city kids, I'm a small town gal myself, but they learned quickly that marksmanship is going to save their life, and it does. The Germans are floored. They are just, some of them are just standing there and watching, so they couldn't believe that this was happening.
And they talk about this arboreal hell, that they're in this thick woods that was a hunting preserve.
It was.
And they've got to move from end to end through it. And the Germans had been there for what, months, right?
They'd been there for quite a long time, long enough to get their positions well fixed and well defended. The Germans do the same thing again, throughout the trench warfare. As a matter of fact, the German trenches are actually better than the American trenches or British trenches or the French, because the British and the French had the mind, don't make them comfortable, we don't want them to stay. You want them to get out and go over the top. The Germans actually use concrete bunkers, and they actually fortify their trenches. They're doing some of that same thing, not to the extent with concrete and stuff, but they're really defending their positions very, very well in the wood. Yeah, so it's thick woods. It is well thick. I'm only 5'5", and the best description is that you've got brambles and stuff that are about my height, so it makes it very hard to see until they're on top of you, until they're in front of you. It's not pretty. And then now add gas masks to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, how extensive was gas use?
Gas was extensively used, and we'll talk about one here in a minute. And they can't see, and then I'm sitting here and my glasses are fogging up, because I'm a little warm in the lights, but the same effect happens with the gas masks. And I'm sure those of you who've gone through gas training, it's not pleasant. when all that stuff gets in there and the moisture and everything, how do you see? Yeah, I don't know.
And it's summertime.
And it's summertime and it's hot. And I'll tell you, summertime in France is not pleasant.
How long was there sustained combat just to get through the woods?
So they're actually in the battle, the first part of that, for about 2 weeks, pretty well sustained. And it's not just the woods. There is the battle for Barrage, where the 6th Marines are really into it. And then they're having these little towns of Torcy and Lucy-le-Bocage and some action and open farm fields and stuff. So it's about 2 weeks, and then they pull the Marines back. And this is when the 7th Infantry comes in. And those poor Marine soldiers of the 7th Infantry are actually a lot of really green recruits, and they get thrown into the meat grinder, and the Germans chew them up. And it's then they realize, oh, we got to get the Marines back in there. And this is when the Marines come back in that last week and start to clean up. But the 7th, it really gets battered bad.
Was the turning point for the war the fact that the Marines not only held the line, but were able to take it to the Germans and punch through their lines for the first time?
Well, for the Marines, yes, at that point, but that's happening across the front where the Americans are. So this is a larger, the turning point really is the American engagement in the war and us being able to stop that forward progression towards Paris and to push them back. And the Germans finally realize, we're done. The Americans are in it now. They're staying. They are skilled. They're green, yes, but they know they're going to fight, and there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have the reserves that they do. And we didn't bring to bear everything that the American populace could bring to bear in the war. We hadn't been there as long as the French and the British. If we'd really gotten going, we'd have seen a juggernaut like we did in World War II, I'm pretty sure.
Organizationally, what did the Marine Corps look like going into World War I and then coming out of World War I?
So leading up to World War I, in 1914, we actually start to see permanent regiments. Before that, we didn't have permanent regiments. What you would form, you would pull a little bit from a garrison, you would pull some from a barracks, you'd pull some from a ship, and you'd form up a provisional unit, sometimes enough to provisional brigade. They would go do the mission, and they'd come back and then scatter back to the winds. We didn't have that. 1914, you start seeing the advanced base force concept come about, 1st and 2nd regiments there. Then we get the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th. This sets the stage for the Marine Corps. This is going to show us we can sustain permanent forces. We don't need to be relegated to this backwater duty. We can be in the fight just like anybody else, and it sticks. And they keep working this through the 20s and the 30s, and then they started taking on the amphibious doctrine to really hold things down. But it really, and then you have the permanent bases. Quantico's there to stay. Parris Island is there to stay. And things start to grow from there. And the prestige of the general officer. So Lejeune comes in, he's really going to hit it hard. The Marine Corps needs to stay.
Were the Marines treated more as equals now by the War Department after what they did in World War I, or is it still,
It's still,
fight for their turf?
they still had to fight for their turf. You still have the sort of a big brother kind of attitude, oh, you're very nice. The Army's still going to have that. The Army's going to have that throughout, World War II even. That rivalry is going to stay. I mean, it leads to the Unification Act in 1947, so we're still dealing with it in the late 40s. It is on equal footing with the Navy. The Navy actually starts to understand it a little bit better and treat us a little bit better within the Navy department. It's still tenuous, but it has a better reputation. It is more on solid footing.
Annette, the sacrifices were made by the Marines up to that time. Mm-hmm. How did they equate with all the wars the Marines fought in up to that time?
So Belleau Wood is the bloodiest battle up to that point. It has more casualties than any other battle, any other war combined to that date. But Belleau Wood is not the bloodiest of World War I, as one of its myths. Blancmont and Soissons, for their time period, or 2 days, 1 day. Belleau Wood's 3 weeks. Blancmont and Soissons are much worse, but the Marines continued to take the fight to the Germans. This is the story that is Belleau. This is the story that is Belleau Wood, that is World War I. The tenacity, the unwillingness to quit. The mission is at hand. We need to achieve it. And we take a beating in Belleau Wood. We take a beating in World War I. Period.
Annette, is it just my age, or was it the heat in Quantico 50 years ago that I remember Belleau Wood, I remember the history lesson, but it didn't really stick, and it's now coming to fore, 50 years later, and I see it with the new Corps, that they seem to accept Belleau Wood really even more so than the Chosin Reservoir, Guadalcanal. Is that just me, or is there a real resurrection of Belleau Wood as being one of the most seminal events in the Marine Corps history?
I think you're seeing a resurrection of it because we fast approached the centennial. But I think because when General Krulak came in as commandant, he had a real eye for what World War I meant and what particularly Belleau Wood meant. And that's where you see the annual trek back to Belleau Wood during the Memorial Day ceremonies at the Aisne-Marne Cemetery. And that push to really get that back into the history of the Marine Corps, and that it has this lasting impact on the Corps. So, this is where you're seeing it, and now it's even more ramped up when, the colonel and the regiments are going over and they have this chance to go and visit and see, and, I think it means more to them than it ever has.
I just got an email from a Marine I was embedded with, and he was being deployed over to AFRICOM, and they were going through Europe, and he said, we went to Belleau Wood. We took a few days off, and we went to Belleau Wood. And there was so much, it was almost like going to Mecca for them.
It is, and I think that, Belleau Wood is that holy ground, and as a matter of fact, if you go there today, it looks very much like it did then. It has not changed. There are not these big monuments like Gettysburg. The ground is not manicured with an inch of its life outside of the cemetery. It is still farms, and a lot of times those farms are still owned by the same families. And their wheat field is still there. The wood is still there. And you could go into it. Now, time has softened some of those impact craters and those trenches, but they're still there. And yes, there's still unexploded ordnance there, and the French are still dealing with it. But you can go to a place that looks very much like it did then, and it will raise the hair on the back of your neck and realizing this is what they were seeing. This is what they were dealing with.